All right, so this is the first lecture topic, microbiology. Most of the material is covered in Chapter 1. I do put that little note in for Canvas for you guys that in the case of Koch's postulates, I actually want you to continue reading. You know how sometimes they say, oh, we'll continue to talk about this in another chapter, and they give you that information in the book. And most people don't go to it because they're like, oh, we'll just go to it later. In this case, that one you go to now. It's section like 18 something or other. So you'll see that on Canvas, right, where I have the objectives in your PowerPoints. Remember, your objectives are what? Yeah, they're in modules, but why do I give them to you? What are they? It's your study guide, right? It's test material. It's what we're going to discuss in this course, right? And it's an objective-based course. So I'll explain that further, too, as we go throughout. But that's what my PowerPoints go over, is those objectives. And that's what you should focus in on when you're reading. Chapter 1 has a lot of preliminary or pre-information, like, you know, what proteins are, and hopefully some of you guys remember that stuff from biology. You may not. Don't skip over that. If you're not so sure, you don't remember some of that stuff, read it in this chapter. I'm not going to test you on it because the prerequisites for this class, you were supposed to cover that on. When I was in undergraduate, you get to those 400 level classes and they're still talking about like cell biology. When my professor got up there and started out with like the cell and the structure of the cell, I was like, dude, move aside. I can handle this. I can teach this for you. I am over this material, right, at this point. But we have a lot of material to cover, so I don't want to, for the most of the class, it should be at that level. I don't want to go back down to that level. But if you're not at that level and you read in the book and you're still like, oh my God, those things terrified me back in biology and they're still terrifying, come see me, right? And we'll get you up to speed. Because you do need to know what DNA is, right? What it stands for. What does it stand for? Right. And what it's actually made out of. Because we're going to talk about genetics, and guess what? That's DNA, isn't it? And RNA. And then we make what from that, mostly? Proteins. And what structure in the cell makes that that's actually made of RNA and protein? Rabies. Oh, see, you guys are ace in this. Right. Okay. But if you're one of those ones that are like, oh, I'm so keeping my mouth shut right now, I don't know what she's talking about, read your book. Okay. And then come see me. Okay, so microorganisms get kind of a bad rap, right? And we're actually going to kind of start out with that bad rap. And this is some of that material, too, that I told you that's not really covered directly in your book, but I cover in my PowerPoint, and you're responsible for it. It's under the objectives. So I have a table in this PowerPoint and some pictures, and you need to be able to, as the objective will say, associate specific diseases to information about them. So mostly we focus on that, right? We focus on the bad guys. But in truth, we would not exist on this planet without them, right? As you read through Chapter 1, right, they'll go into some of those really important specifics in nutrient cycling, things like nitrogen, right? Plants need nitrogen to grow, right? In addition to light to be able to do what process? Photosynthesis, right? And so that is actually made possible. There's tons of nitrogen in the atmosphere. Part of the reason because organisms break it down, some microorganisms even break it down and put it into the atmosphere. But to get it back into the soil or back associated into plants, guess who does that? Microorganisms. So our life on this planet, right, would not exist because even if you're not a vegetarian, although you need to eat your vegetables, right, some other animal that you're eating eats vegetables, right, eats plants, the primary producers. So they are microorganisms, especially because they're so tiny, right, this makes it easier for them to be the most abundant organisms on this planet. And major important contributors to life on this planet. And they're responsible for those cycling, so things like nitrogen. Another gas that we utilize to breathe is what? Oxygen. And most of us learn, right, when you learn about photosynthesis, what makes oxygen? Photosynthesis. And most of the time when you think photosynthesis, what type of organism do you think of? You think of plants, right? Well, I got news for you. They use just as much oxygen as they produce. They're not helping us. It's the microorganisms in our oceans, the cyanobacteria and the algae, that produce the excess of oxygen that allow aerobic respiration for organisms like ourselves to actually exist on this planet, not plants. Right? So there are other organisms, microorganisms, that actually produce oxygen via photosynthesis. Cyanobacteria and the algae in our oceans. They do benefit us, right? Some of the food production, some of the beverages, especially the ones we like to consume probably on the weekends, I hope, right? Sometimes during the week, after a week like this one, it might be necessary, right? So those beverages, we're talking about what? Yeah, we're talking about the process of fermentation that microorganisms can do to produce a product that we like to drink known as alcohol, right? Found in beer, in wine, in liquors. Yeah, and it's that process that they do that generate that. And then you could take other things and ferment them, right? Sauerkraut is fermented cabbage, right? Kimchi is also a form of fermented cabbage with different spices that Koreans love. They also make kimchi out of other things other than cabbage. They kimchi just about anything you can think of. And it's quite spicy, but it's good stuff. What else do we ferment? Ferment milk, don't we? Yeah, what do we make when we ferment milk? Yogurt, sour cream, buttermilk. What's cheeses. I was going to say, for the love of cheese. Right? I love cheese. I had 2 cheese sticks today. Mozzarella cheese sticks. Good stuff. Okay, I have antibiotics on this list. And a lot of times people are like, whoa, wait a minute here. When do you take antibiotics? When you're sick with a bacterial infection, right? Guess where antibiotics come from? Yeah, it says microorganisms on there. Whoa. Okay, let's step back. There's probably one you're familiar with. Alexander Fleming, thank you for screwing up in your lab, right? What one do we know about because of him? Penicillin. What fell into his stuff that actually grew and produced this compound we know as penicillin? Yeah, it was a sandwich, but what grows on bread at your house? Mold. It was a mold. It was a mold that we named penicillium after the compound penicillin that we're able to now extract and others extracted from that mold. So, why is mold producing something that kills bacteria? Protect itself, right? Microorganisms have been at war just as long as we've been at war. And they fight over pretty much the same stuff. Right? Food, resources, a place to live. And they use chemical warfare. So would we take antibiotics? Guess what we're using? Stolen technology. Right? And that's why there's a huge initiative right now, too, to continue studying microorganisms to try and find new antibiotics because we're running out of them, right? Because do microorganisms stay the same? No, we've got tons of resistant strains of bacteria out there now that are resistant to things like penicillin. MRSA that people blend together to some strange word called MRSA, right, is Myctoline-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, right? Staph aureus is the name of the organism. Myctoxylin is a penicillin derivative that was commonly used for what we call a staph infection, an abbreviation of the word of the organism's name that causes the infection. Right? So, and then we switch to another antibiotic. So guess what? Now we have VRSA. So what's the V antibiotic? Anyone know? Vancomycin. Right? Will the list continue? Oh, yeah. Right? And are we going to run out of drugs? We have. There is a bacteria out there right now that's resistant to all known antibiotics. We've already reached that day.
Isn't like the coronavirus? Isn't that resistant to a lot of...
Yeah, but you just said virus, didn't you?
I did. I really did.
You did. You did. And that's okay. But most of us hopefully at this point know you can't take antibiotics against viruses, right? What do you have to take against viruses? Antivirals. And they work in different ways, right? But antibiotic actually means that it was actually made by a micro. Now, we've actually modified penicillin. Ampicillin, amoxicillin, we've actually chemically modified the natural form so that it'll work against different bacteria than just straight up penicillin. Right? So, I mean, we've really played around with things. But even still, right, there's this constant evolution that happens both for us and for them, you know. And they're going to win out if we can't steal some more technology or develop some more technology, or a little bit of both, right? So they want to survive, we want to survive. It's a battle, right? Hopefully we continue to mostly win that one. How many people take vitamins? Go to GNC or your grocery store or any place else, order them online. Guess what? Most of the sources for those come from microorganisms, right? They'll produce, and some of them are bioengineered to produce specific vitamins. Others produce them naturally, and they just purify them, right, from them. Most of them, if you eat a well-balanced diet, which Americans are notorious for not doing, you really don't need to take a multivitamin or supplemental vitamins. And a lot of the vitamins, essential vitamins that you need, are actually produced by the microorganisms in your intestines, digesting the food you didn't digest, and they produce those vitamins and you absorb them and you utilize them. Probiotics, on the other hand, taken orally, really doesn't do you much good unless it's encapsulated in such a way that it's not going to break open and be digested until the intestines. Your best route, if you really have to change that environment, is actually going the other way. Which nobody, yeah, you all groaned, right? No one wants to shove it up their butthole. Right? But there's been lots, I mean, you know, this is like the new thing, right? You know, get the good bacteria in there. But again, if you have a well-balanced diet, you shouldn't necessarily need that kind of thing, right? You could skip it altogether. But, you know, for some people, right, we want the easy way out. We want to go to the doctor. We want them to give us a pill, right? Even though they say, no, you have a virus. I can't give you an antibiotic. They want that pill, right? They want that quick fix. Don't we all, right? But not always possible. So our first objective, and I used to use units. I just realized I haven't changed that. They use the word modules, and they won't let us change it in Canvas. So this is really just Module 1. Is to be able to associate selected pathogenic microorganisms with specific infectious disease. Now, I said we're going to take our tests on the computer, right? They're going to be what format, you think? We'll make you write an essay, right? No, because then I'd have to grade it. So what do you think? Multiple choice or multiple guess, depending on how you look at it. Hopefully not that case. What else? True, false. One more. People don't like this one too much. Matching. So read this objective again and pick one. Yeah, matching. Y'all see that?
Yeah.
Ah. Yes, no, maybe so?
Yeah.
Getting there? Okay. All right. So I'll probably give you the name of the disease and some description, and you got to put the two together. And I'm not one of those evil ones where they don't match evenly. Instructors where like they'll give you more choices than there are matches. Yeah, I don't do that. I thought you were upset. I was like, you are strange, child. Most of my students don't really like matching, but you know, sometimes that's the best way to do particular things. I'm notorious for stealing stuff from the internet, and I'm being good now and actually posting when I steal it where I stole it from. I'm not stealing, I'm sharing. It's sharing, it's sharing. It's for educational purposes. I'm not claiming it's mine, right? But I'm definitely letting you know I got this from the internet. So this is a really good diagram, right? And it talks about transmission. And again, nowadays, most of us are very much aware right, on how disease is spread, right? What the do's and don'ts are, right, and how to avoid certain things. So definitely in Louisiana, right, and anywhere in the world, we know that, unfortunately, you could just inhale something that's in the air, right, carried by the wind currents and whatnot. You could drink some water, right, and it could be contaminated. You could have entry into your skin and from environmental sources. You can also have things transmitted not directly from person to person, but via what we refer to as vectors. Now, these can be animals, right, like this strange-looking bird or this mousey, I guess, or the even worse ones that we tend to really dislike in Louisiana, things like mosquitoes, right, fleas and ticks, right? These are commonly referred to as vectors. So these are organisms, right, that can transmit disease, most often by biting, right, but sometimes just contact with them, right, can spread disease. So human to human, how do we spread to each other? Direct contact, right, and a lot of times this has to be quite intimate contact. And that is because the pathogen survives best within the body. And so once it's out of the body, its life expectancy dramatically decreases, right? So it can't survive without you. So if you don't quickly, right, pass it to someone else, then it's not going to survive, right? So if you sneeze on the doorknob, right, and nobody touches it for a couple hours, chances are the next person, it's dry, it's dead, there's nothing there that you're going to pick up and then enter into your own body, right? That's what we call indirect, right? We have to worry about things like the flu virus that can survive on surfaces and things like that, right? Inanimate objects. It survives in that type of environment, right? So influenza is one of them. Anyone ever experienced what I call a face talker? Yeah, they talk in your face. When you talk, right, you release respiratory droplets that could contain pathogens, right? The standard is about 3 feet, which is, about arm's length, right? If you experience a face talker and you back up, they just keep coming, don't they? They just keep, this is what you do. You put your hands up, right, and you protect yourself. Barracks and militaries are actually spaced a particular distance apart to minimize this transfer of respiratory droplets from one individual to another. Right? What? It doesn't work. Yeah, because, it depends on the circumstances. But, so some things, it's literally exchange of body fluids, right? Like HIV and herpes viruses. So we'll talk about especially viruses a little bit more when we get to actual viruses. And as I said, I'm going to try and bring in real world examples, right? So we'll talk about herpes virus, we'll talk about chickenpox and all that good stuff and how it relates. So droplets, as I said, right? When you talk, you release these. When you sneeze, they release even further, right? Most kids, thankfully, nowadays, y'all, this is the cool thing. They're all vampires. They're taught to sneeze into their elbow. Do the vampire, right? That's what my little kid learned in school. Do the vampire, right? Don't sneeze on your hands, because then whenever you touch, you're then transferring. And don't spit, right? Spitting is the most disgusting thing ever. If you really can, and there's like too much in there, get rid of it in a safe manner that you're not exposing others to it. The sidewalk is not a safe manner, right? If you have tuberculosis, right, that can survive in the environment, and as little as 10 bacteria, if those get kicked up and someone inhales, they will get the disease, right? People who spit, like, I have to like keep myself under control because they might shoot me or something, but I want to scream at them, right? Because they could potentially be spreading disease, right? Swallow that stuff. Your body is meant to deal with it, right? So the other problem too is, like I said, things like tuberculosis and influenza, right? They can even become part of the environment. They could be kicked up in the air. You can inhale it. Why? That's why some things, it doesn't matter how far apart you are, depends on how it's transmitted, right? On whether you're going to get exposed to it. The least favorite, of course, is the good old fecal-oral route, and this is where something you've eaten, right, or drank has been contaminated with basically feces, right? And these are organisms that go through the digestive tract, end up in fecal matter, right, and then therefore contaminate something you then ingest. And so things like Shigella, Salmonella, Typhoid Mary, that was Salmonella, that's a form of Salmonella. And that's an interesting story that we talk about in lab. And it very simply could have been avoided if she'd done what after she went to the bathroom? Washed her hands, right? Wash your hands. It's an intestinal and bacterial infection. It's not a good one either. Oh yeah, no, there really aren't any good ones. It's a pretty bad bug. He's pretty evil and does some pretty evil things. It'll destroy your cells. It'll run from cell to another. It can avoid detection by your immune system. It's not nice. So, etiological agent. Anyone have another name for that? No, this whole column is etiological. The disease for this one, for Bacillus anthracis, as you guessed, is anthrax, right? Right. It's what causes the disease, right? Etiological means cause, right? So what causes it? So this is Bacillus anthracis. So this is a bacteria, a virus, or a eukaryotic microscopic organism. Anyone know? It's a bacteria. It's a bacteria. The scary thing about the bacteria, right, and other than humans, there's a lot of animals that can get this infection and die of it. And if we inhale or ingest spores, and in fact this should say endospores, or have direct contact with it, we will get this infection. Again, not a good infection. You could potentially die if you don't get treatment soon enough. The good news is in the United States, we've done a really good job of cleaning up infections and outbreaks of this for so long that you don't really even hear about it. It's when stuff gets imported from other countries or when people go to other countries. The really scary thing about this is this ability to form endospores. So this is a dormant form of the bacteria. It's not actively metabolizing, right? And if you read through the chapter, right, they'll talk about endospores. But when they're inhaled, say, or they get into a wound, they're able to sense that they're in a favorable environment that they can begin growing again. So it turns back into that original cell it once was and starts replicating. The bad news about this one is it eats you alive, right? It's a really bad bacteria. So since we don't have it here in the United States, we also don't vaccinate against it anymore. So there's the fear that somebody's going to use this in a bad way, what we refer as an act of, in this case, bioterrorism. Right? So this is listed as a bioterrorist agent. And it has been employed in the past, right? Some idiot sent it through the mail. And they saw it as a white powder. Well, that was millions upon billions of these microscopic endospores that once inhaled, right, can cause a really serious disease. Most military that travel overseas get vaccinated against this, right, to protect them.
So it's dormant until it's in a favorable
environment. Yeah. This next one, at one time they thought there were several different species of this organism. And when we talk about organisms, right, we give them the two names. We give them the genus and the species name. But just like us, where we have a first and last name at least, you can kind of say they have a first and a last name, right? So when you see two names, right, especially when the first one is capitalized and the next one is not, And usually, technically, these should be what? How should these be written? They should be italicized. They should be italicized. Brucella melitensis and Brucella abortus and Bullseye, most scientists at this point, we've come to the conclusion it is all the same bacteria. And they're using this Brucella melitensis as the main name. Right? But you may see sometimes these other names. That's why I put them out there. And this one especially, Brucella abortus, was the one typically they saw in cattle. And it kind of gives you a clue of one of the things it will do. It'll cause abortions. Not in people, though, surprisingly, but in most animals, it causes abortion. And suis was the name for pig, right? And melitensis actually was some derivative of goat, is where that name come from. So, especially for the ones that, all of these, well, except for fowl, but quite a few of them produce milk. But of course, cattle, and especially in other countries, goats are used primarily as a milk source, right? So the milk can become contaminated, and so that's one of the ways that we can acquire this particular bacteria. But you could come in direct contact, and that's the fear for cattle ranchers, is that this can very easily be spread from one cow to another, and then all the moms abort their babies, and then you lose your whole herd, right? Very easily. They vaccinate against this. Anyone know what? And this one is listed as a bioterrorist agent because it could decimate one of our major food supplies, which is cattle, beef. As Americans, we eat that a lot. Yeah. Anyone know? Anyone ever heard of this one? Where's all my vet tech peeps? Is this not the class that's a whole bunch of vet techs? You guys don't know this one? All right. Brucellosis, right, or sometimes referred to as undulate fever. Of course, you guys are probably interested in cats and dogs, and we don't really worry about this in cats and dogs. We worry about Bordetella, right, for them. So for this one, as well as, believe it or not, tuberculosis can be spread in milk as well. And there's a couple other infections out there. My ex-husband, when he was deployed to Afghanistan, they had this machine in town, right, soft-serve ice cream machine. And one of the guys was a huge sugar fiend, and he's like running up, he's, because it said American ice cream, right? And he was going to get a soft-serve ice cream from this stand in town. And my husband's like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "What? It says American ice cream." He's like, "Dude, do you really think that milk came from the United States? It came from the goat farm we just passed down the road. It is an American machine, yes, and they're making it in the American style, but it is not American, it is not safe to ingest." Well, unfortunately for the rest of the guys that were allowed to go out in town, they were not with my husband, who has the background that he has, and they ate the ice cream and ended up in the infirmary. Not because of something maybe like brucellosis or something else, but there are they don't pasteurize the milk there, right? They're used to the microbes that are present there. Americans are not, right? They all had diarrhea, puking, it was great, and all their passes were revoked from then on because they couldn't follow the rules that told you not to eat in town. Right? They don't understand these things. Bordetella hensei. This one is commonly by the scratch of a dog or a cat, more predominantly who scratches you? Cats, right? So this one is commonly referred to as, yeah, you guys know this one, cat scratch fever, right? This one is, again, a bacteria. And any wound that gets infected with saliva from a cat or a dog that has this bacterial infection, you're going to get this infection. The good news is, for the most part, your body can kind of take care of it on its own. It'll enlarge your lymph nodes in the area, right? This is the part of your body that drains the fluid and helps trap microbes. And you have a lot of them in your neck region. If you ever go to the doctor and they say you have swollen glands and he palpates them and they're sore, that's actually a good thing, right? When they're sore, it means you have an infection, right? Maybe bacterial, maybe we can take care of this, maybe we can clear this up. You have a lot in your armpit region, so a lot of times we get scratched on the hands, right, or arms, and the lymph nodes, the large concentration of them in the armpit region will actually collect the bacteria and try to take care of it. And in that process, they will swell, right? So you'll get swollen lymph nodes in that region. For women, this creates a problem because doctors start freaking out if they see swollen lymph nodes on scans when you go for mammograms and stuff like that, and they're going to start wanting to do things like biopsies. So if you're a person that hangs out with cats, you might be like, hey, let's check and make sure I don't have cat scratch first, right? Let's try a round of antibiotics to get rid of these swollen lymph nodes, right? And for my sister, that happened to her. She had some other infection and her lymph nodes were just, inflamed, and she had to be on antibiotics for a long time. She kept getting sick and better and sick and better. It just wasn't going away. But, when it comes to the breastises, we get pretty freaked out, right? All of us, for that matter. And cancer. So the other interesting thing is, how does it get transmitted between cats and dogs? Anyone know? Fights, yeah. But there's actually a vector involved. Fleas, yeah, fleas. So where you really have to worry the most about this is those stray kitty cats, right, that look so cute, right? And my son's always like, oh, Mom, you don't touch it. Leave it alone. It's going to attack you, right? If it doesn't run away before you even get there to begin with. But if you corner it, it's like, right? It's not pretty. Leave them alone, right? Nobody is giving them flea preventative, right? Those stray cats that they clip their ears, right? You see cats with these cropped off ears in the city. They've fixed them so that we can bring down the population. And some people feed them, but they're not giving them flea preventative. Right? Go ahead.
It's strange because this is like Christmas time, right? And a bunch of my family was at the house, and the young kids are outside playing. So normally, I don't see anybody outside when I go outside because I play with them a lot. And I saw them petting the cat.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my God. Quickly, I'm thinking, okay, I don't know what the cat got. Let me go intervene because I don't know what could happen. So I'm telling them, like, okay, listen. I say, I'm not fussing at you because you play with me. I say, I'm more concerned about your safety. Please don't pet the cat. Leave the cat alone. Okay?
We don't know this cat.
Right. Like, this cat is a stray cat, and I don't want you guys to get hurt.
Yeah.
So, like, I literally had to explain this to them like maybe three times because, kids don't listen.
Yeah.
I was really kind of freaked out because I don't know, I
Yeah.
really didn't want them to get hurt or scratched or,
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, there's so many other things that they could be carrying too, So, rabies.
And one of my cats that I have, actually, we rescued him because he was in jail. We actually rescued him about a week after the comment they said that you shouldn't rescue him.
They're too
I
old.
don't remember if it's like 2 months.
Yeah.
I don't remember exactly what age ranges when you rescue a cat.
Yeah.
Before it becomes just the mindset is truly good.
Yeah.
Anyway, we rescued him about a week afterwards. It's a club that got like cat, but it's never been exactly tame. But it's
Yeah.
good cat. But you can definitely still see that he's still has some of it.
Yeah. I mean, they're going to natural survival mode, and it's kind of hard to like reprogram that, right? As to domestic life. Cats are probably the hardest. I love cats. I've owned them. I don't think I'll ever own them again.
I used to own like 8 and seriously we ended up creating
So this whole rest of the list too, notice this says arbroviruses, right? So they're all viruses, right? And they get this name because they're carried by arthropods, right? Most commonly, the one we fear here in Louisiana is the mosquito. And unfortunately, some of these can cause pretty serious disease. So encephalitis, so who's my anatomy and physiology or medical term people? What part of the body? The brain, right? And so this actually can infect the brain, right? Some of these viruses can infect the brain. There's lots of different encephalitises. In that case, we're talking about an inflammation of the brain, right? Lots of different things can cause that. So then we got to go one step further and say, okay, what's causing it? Well, arboviruses in the group known as the St. Louis can cause this. West Nile is one that we watch for here in Louisiana, right? They literally trap the mosquitoes that carry that and test for it. And if the truck is coming by and spraying near your house more often, especially live in rural areas, is because they've gotten positive results in their traps. And they're trying to kill them off, right? Zika is the big fear one right now, right? That the mosquitoes may acquire that and spread that to us. There's always these viruses that these guys are carrying. The fear is what they can potentially do. And some of us have probably even had some of these infections, and for the most of us, our immune system's able to take care of it. It's the really young and the elderly whose immune systems are not up to speed yet or waning that are really at risk, not us in that middle group per se, unless you don't have any other health issues. But unfortunately, sometimes it can become a more aggressive situation where, yeah, it spreads to the brain. It's not just, you don't feel like you just have a virus cold, right? It's something more severe. And that's why, too, if your symptoms ever persist too long, you should always seek medical attention. I know that's not always the easiest thing in this world we live in, but you should. So this one has two names, right? So immediately we're thinking, what type of organism? Bacteria, virus, or maybe something else. This one's actually a protozoa. It's a eukaryotic organism, right? And of course the name tells you what it is, right? Giardias. Caused by Giardia instantalis. Sometimes you'll hear the species name vaginitis because it can cause an infection in the vagina. Again, they're one and the same. And most scientists are going with Giardia instantalis as opposed to vaginitis. Same bacteria, right? Just the infection is in a different place, the intestines versus the vagina. So animals, rodents, deer, cattle, dogs will carry this in their intestines, and even people. And then, of course, for them, for wild animals, the water supplies are the toilet, right? And so then they contaminate the water, and that's usually how we get these types of infections. We ingest contaminated water. Lots of cats and dogs will carry this infection. It won't even affect them, too. And the scientist who discovered this, way back when, was the first to describe this organism, was looking at his own poop under the microscope. Yep, very interesting. He was a very inquisitive individual.
Is Giardia also beaver fever?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. It's got the common name beaver fever, yep. So pulmonary syndrome hantavirus is known as Hantavirus pulmonary syndrome. So as you can imagine, right, and actually the disease was discovered first, right? People had these symptoms, they didn't know what was causing it, and then eventually they were able to link them to the hantavirus. And this one's commonly carried by deer mice, and they'll excrete it in their saliva and their feces. And I think even their fleas can transmit it as well. Their urine is contagious. It can become part of the environment, and it can become aerosolized. The good news is it's not prevalent in this part of the United States. It's more prevalent in Arizona, the more arid regions. And so again, one of the things that you want to avoid is mice that would be the prime carriers of this virus. The bad news is when we're dealing with a virus, we've already said, can you take antibiotics? No. What are you going to take? Do we have antivirals against this one? Not that I'm aware of at this point. Could have some. So what do? They support you, right, and try and keep you alive, and they pray what's going to take care of the problem? Your immune system. That's what saves your butt 90% of the time when you get a virus infection. Right, so I mean, those are things that we're looking at. We're going to try and support you as best you can so that you can survive it. And that's the thing that people don't realize too, like when you're sick and you're tired, your body is actually literally telling you, go to sleep, rest, so I can take care of this problem that's on board, right? Would you please stop? But we don't stop, do we? We take drugs so that we feel better, and we override what our system is telling us to do, which is stop, right? I know I'm one of the worst offenders too. I won't stop sometimes, right? And then you get to the point where your body goes, I'm going to make you stop whether you want or not.
And that's when you pass out.
Yeah, exactly. Did you have something to say?
Yeah, as far as like deer mice, is that genetic or is that just something that they pick up?
Oh, yeah, it's a good question. So that's something that, we're going to get to with viruses. So why is it that, we get HIV and cats don't? Well, they get a different form of disease, a virus that affects their immune system, but it's not the same one we have, right? Ours is human immunodeficiency virus. Why is that? Because the very first thing a virus needs to do is stick to you, right? And so in this case, this is also referred to as a zoonotic disease because it's present in both animals and humans, right? It can be passed in between. But it's more predominant in them, and they've developed this symbiotic type relationship that usually they don't even appear sick. Just like cats that have cat scratch, you don't know they have a bacterial infection, right? That doesn't really affect them. But for some reason, when it gets in us, it causes more serious problems, right? Turtles carry salmonella. Chickens carry salmonella. Why aren't they all like, sick and, because they, it doesn't affect them quite as badly as it affects us. Does that make sense? Good question. So this is the one why you wash the top of your cans if you're not going to cook what you're eating, though, right? Because cooking will actually disrupt this virus. But if your cans were stored in some warehouse in Arizona and some little mouse ran across and peed on top of them, and you open that can of peaches and you're just going to eat right out that can, it's probably not a good idea to not have washed the top of that can first. And again, if it's dusty, we do that anyways, but do it even if it isn't dusty because, again, you're not going to see this, right? This is submicroscopic as far as we're concerned because you can't see with the light microscope, right? You can't see viruses. So clean those cans. The next one, right, this is very rare as well in Louisiana, although there has been a case that happened thanks to the import of a Christmas tree from the Northeast. This disease caused by bacteria, Borrelia burgdorferi. Anyone know? It's transmitted by ticks. And you'll get a characteristic rash when you get bit by Lyme disease, right? It's called that Bullseye Rash, right? And so that doesn't always happen. This bacteria is really interesting. It's a spirochete. Actually, it's shaped like a slinky or spiral staircase, right? They corkscrew through. They can swim through. And so they spread out from the bite. They spread out in a circular fashion. And so you get a rash as the immune system is responding, and you'll get several circles of a rash. Like you'll get the original bullseye, and then you'll get another circle around that of a rash sometimes. Not always, but sometimes. So that's a pretty good, clear indicator. And so people travel, right? This is mainly a major problem in the Northeast. So, Massachusetts, New England, where I grew up. We even vaccinate our companion animals against this. We have treatment for it, but a lot of times people don't realize they have the infection until it's progressed to the later stages, and that's much harder to treat. And then the damage that it's caused to the body, it can be quite damaging to the joints. Again, as the immune system's trying to get the infection under control, it's going to attack wherever it is. And so, although they can clear the infection, they can't take away the damage the infection may have done to the individual. And it's spreading. So that's another why it's kind of interesting with this. So this is, again, it's spread by ticks, but what they don't tell you here is that it's the ticks usually associated with deer, right? And so they're mainly in the Northeast. What do you know about the population in the Northeast? It's congested, isn't it? Right? And until recently, they've really realized how important reserves are, right? Areas where people don't use agriculture or build their homes and leave these places for wild animals. Because wild animals are a source of infection, right? And if you move them out, guess what they take with them? Their diseases, right? So it's spreading, right? Because a loss of habitat is one of the major contributors to the reason for the spread for Lyme disease, as well as people spreading, but introducing that into the area. But mainly it's the animals, right, that are the main reservoir. They're moving out of the areas because the people are taking up all the areas, and so then therefore the disease spreads. And that's one of the terrifying things about the modern world, right? And Neisseria pestilens was a really serious problem back in literally medieval times. We commonly refer to this as the plague, yeah. Or bubonic plague or Black Death, right? It's another one where it affected the lymph nodes and the blood system, and so the people literally looked black. It was gross. It was a bacteria transmitted by fleas. So again, like rats and mice and unsanitary conditions that existed back then really contributed to the spread of this. And there's another form that's even more scary, is when the person would inhale it and get a respiratory infection. So you can get pneumonic plague. And in that case, when people were coughing and other people were inhaling it, and they were getting the infection in the lungs, it was spreading even faster. So I mean, this wiped out a large number of the people during those times until they basically cleaned things up. But back then, as we're going to talk about, people believed, they didn't understand disease transmission and where these things come from. They really believed that like somebody put a witch curse on you, or God was punishing you, or you did something bad, right? They don't understand where this was coming from, right? So nowadays, it's under control, but it still happens. There are still cases in the United States each year. I mean, this thing is still on this planet. We have not eradicated it. But, you know, improved sanitation has been one of the major contributing factors to why you don't see it anymore. The speed of travel nowadays, right? Can you imagine that compounded? I mean, you can see how it moved through Europe in your book, right? How much faster that would have been if we were talking about today's times and the speed of travel. And that's the scary thing about today, and how easily it is for people to travel large distances in very short periods of time. So you don't even know you're sick, right? You're traveling, you're exposing others. I don't even travel during the holidays. I told my mom Christmas is in July, right? I do not go to New England in freezing cold temperatures. Why? Because I have to huddle up on a plane when everyone else is always sick because they're huddling up together, and this is when things are spread more. Right? So we would notoriously get sick. So I only go in the summertime when illness isn't so rapid. The last one, right, it pretty much gives you the answer, right, when it talks about how you actually get it, and that would be the bite of a rabid animal. So we're talking about what disease? But what's it caused by? Is it a bacteria? Is it a virus? Is it a eukaryotic organism? It's a virus. It's a virus. And that's the other really terrifying thing about this, right? It's a virus. We don't have much to protect ourselves against this, right? We have some vaccination that we believe is effective, right? And we vaccinate our companion animals to create a buffer zone between us and the wild animal population. Anyone know the major offender in Louisiana on this list who's a major carrier of rabies of wild animal population? Raccoons. Raccoons are number one. Possums, some people are saying that they don't get as easily infected as other animals. Are saying they're not quite the fear. I mean, we got a lot of them. If you are here at night in New Orleans, we've got a lot of possums. You know, like they call armadillos in Texas speed bumps. I think, right, you know, possums are going to become, their population is exploding in New Orleans. We had one living under our house, and I said, well, I'd rather that than the stray cats. You know, I mean, you just like gotta pick your battles, right? So as you can imagine, next time I'm going to try and get you guys to match up, right, a description with one of these diseases. And then we're going to start talking about the general stuff and start talking about classification. And we're going to talk a little bit about, you know, how we got to this point where we believe, oh yes, a bacteria can cause these diseases. And that's linked to Koch's postulates. So as I said, if you guys really want to concentrate on the stuff that I'm going to concentrate on, you want to go to the last section of chapter 1, I think it's 3, the third section, where they talk about disease. And then as it says for Koch's postulates, go to chapter 18 and actually read there. Right?
I noticed a note on we gonna have to be able to spell?
Where was that?
I thought it was your class.
Oh, might
Is
have.
that not true?
Lab.
Okay.
In this one, multiple choice, true and false, and matching. How could you have spelling, right? Okay.